So welcome to our first talk of 2014. As we hold with tradition, Bill is our first speaker, the man who needs no introduction, so I'm not going to. That's Bill. We all know him. He's internationally acclaimed, we like to say that. When the phone rings and it's someone from England wanting to speak to William Green, we all get excited. It's pretty cool. I do want to make a couple announcemements. We're still putting together our 2014 schedule, but we do know details for February and March, so I'll announce those tonight. And of course, you'll get them in your e-news or the newsletter. On February 8th, our speakers are going to be Tim Bennett and Larry Ott, who have written a book about Holland International Speedway, the racetrack located south of Buffalo in Erie County. It's a 3/8 paved oval known as Thunder in the Hills. They'll be talking about the history of the track. Larry writes for the Buffalo News. He's a motorsports columnist. And Tim is the general manager of the track, but also son of the owner and founder, Ron, I think it is. Yeah, Ron Bennett. So that should be really good. And they're trying to round up a couple Holland drivers to bring with them. So that will be a good one, February 8th. And then on March 22nd, this one's really going to be good. George Webster, our friend who is with us today, George is back there. George is going to speak about land speed records in post-war America. And that should be really, really good. And he's done a lot of work with that and is pulling it all together for a talk here. So that's Saturday, March 22nd. So write them down. Be sure you join us because
And I'll try to get a couple drivers to come in for that.
Also?
Yeah.
And some cars and some. But as you know, we put together a pretty good speaker program during the year, and we have some really good ones planned. We just don't know the details yet, so you'll be very pleased when you hear those. Of course, we like what we have now. So, that said, I'm going to introduce J.C. Arnottsinger, our president, and he'll introduce Bill a little more. Thank you for being here.
Well, I am going to introduce the man who needs no introduction. As I look around here, and I am so impressed that there are this many people that are turning out, not because Bill is speaking, we're here, but it's a very snowy day, and I know some of you have come to quite a distance through 86, I think. I was told that one lane was open, so this is quite a tribute to Bill. He needs no introduction, just in case there are a few folks here who haven't been here before and talked to Bill. Bill started his collecting and his historical work in 1948. He was here for the first race. I think he was 27 years old. No, he was 7 years old, and he started collecting with his first program. He's been collecting ever since. And he just has a photostat of mine. You know, at the center there are a number of us who just revere automotive history and racing history, and we all think we're experts. So on slow days, one of our fun things to do is stump Bill. And we just have not been able to stump Bill on anything of any substance at all. I try it all the time. I'll call him up at night. Bill, who was third in 1951? And not only will he tell you who was third, he'll tell you the color and the average speed. So Bill has not only been a historian at the Racing Center practically since it's opened its doors, but also at WGI and the Glen Region Sports Car Club. But you know, Bill is just not a one-tune guy, not a one-trick pony. He also collects other things, and which fascinates me, Hopalong Cassidy and also Ida Lupino. And he's a well-rounded guy, and he always gives good talk, so thanks for coming, folks. Bill Green, Edward Green.
Thank you so much. Can you back it up one frame where the program cover is? Right. The Vanderbilt Cup races, you know, were run, not this segment. There were some, William K. that ran on Long Island up until about 1910, and then they moved down in Georgia, and then out to Milwaukee and on the West Coast. And of course, in 1916, road racing died, really. And in between, there were other people. Get to where that thing is. Can you hear me now? Good.
Yeah.
But anyways, the idea was to bring major racing back, road racing. So there's a group got together, and it was called Motor Development Corporation in New York City. And it was made up of several people. George Marshall, who was the president, Paul Abbott, who was the treasurer, George Robinson, who won the 1908 William K. Vanderbilt Cup in the Locomobile. He was vice president and general manager. And then you had Edward Trumley, who was the secretary. You also had, as one of the directors, a guy by the name of Eddie Rickenbacker, World War I fame, ace pilot. He also, at that time, was president, or not president, but he was the chairman for the AAA contest board. He was on that committee. So anyways, they went about and selected this place at Roosevelt Field. And at Roosevelt Field in 1927, Lucky Lindy took off for Paris, and that was right on the main straightaway. Well, anyways, by 1936, they had this thing all ready to go at what would be called Roosevelt Field, Roosevelt Raceway. And of course, they built grandstands, and they built main grandstand, huge observation tower, and several other bunches of grandstands there. Also, they had arranged that the Long Island Railroad and the buses, it'd be special buses so you could come from New York City up to the races, because you know it's quite a ways out to Westbury to get there, and so they had to provide transportation if you didn't drive your own car. And if you were media or elsewise, you didn't get your credentials like we do at the track. You had to go back to New York City and Rockefeller Center where their office was, then come out. You know, it's a little like the Canadian Grand Prix in the earlier days for Formula One. You had to go back to Toronto and get them. But anyways, they had this thing pretty much ready by Columbus Day, October 12th. And slide. And so anyways, as you note in the background, the grandstands really weren't full. There were probably people in the infield more than there were in the grandstands. But in those days, for seat tickets, you know, you got to remember, we're coming out of the Depression. So they ranged from $3.35 to about $10. And then you had the big box seats up above there. They were a whole $17.50. That sounds, you know, sort of a cheap way to go to the races. In those days, we didn't have the money after World War II started and all that. And you also had a program, and that was a whole 25 cents for both years. But it was a very good program. It was quite informative and all that. And so, anyways, they got these thing together. It was a AAA event, an international event. We were able to attract quite a few foreign drivers. We had Scuderia Ferrari here with 3 cars, and 1 for Tazio Nuvolari. You had 3 or 4 ERAs. You had Colonel Howe, Earl Howe. You had Pat Fairfield, and several others. And you had the American drivers that were drove at Indy. And it was quite a good assortment of drivers. And this thing went on during the week, qualifying and practice during the week prior to the actual race. And so there was a lot of activity. Also, as a special consultant to the president of the corporation, which was the organizing factor, was a guy by the name of P.E. Pop Myers, who was the general manager under Rickenbacker at Indianapolis by then. But anyways, things got underway, and the, let's see, I get my cheat sheet here. The event was to be a 400-mile race. Well, they decided that probably people would be bored with 400 miles, so they shortened it to 300. Well, as far as I was concerned, it wouldn't bore me at all, but you know, there are other people who might be fall asleep, but I wouldn't have. You get to see Nuvolari and all the other people that, you know, you read about today. The track itself was put together with A.C. Pillsbury, who was a AAA steward and member of the contest board, and also used to engineer board tracks, along with the fellow by the name of Mark Lennerheth, who was a friend of the George Marshall. They designed what you've seen on there for the 1936 event. So anyways, it was a 4-mile track. The circuit itself had 16 unbanked turns, and there were probably the longest straightaway was 3,775 foot long. That was the main straightaway. And of course, they put up also guardrail. Now they're not thinking of guardrail just like what we have today. They were planked with locust posts, and then there was metal in front of it. There was like 10 miles of plank guardrail, which surrounded keep things safe for the event. So anyways, the track surface was a mixture of clay, sand, gravel, and then there was tar, and today we call it emulsion, to make the surface a blacktop, which was a special emulsion to take the pounding of race cars of that time. And so anyways, the track was ready, and anyways, yeah, I've got to talk about that. I got way ahead of my own stuff. Anyways, the security for both years at the track were the Pinkertons. They were in charge of policing and handling and also guarding the George Vanderbilt Cup trophy. You'll see a picture here in 37. You see two plainclothes guys, but they were Pinkertons. So anyways, the emergency equipment, which would be fire trucks, ambulance, and all that, came from the local area around Westbury, a little like what we did in the early days at the Glen. Had that for security, and the headquarters for that was in the hangar, in the administration hangar. They had ready for first aid and all that stuff. So anyways, let's see. The main control tower, which was way high in the air, that also controlled telephone communications to the corners. It also controlled electric lights. It was a red, green, and all, whatever, to conduct a race with in those days, because Indy already had them. So anyways, there was a capacity in the grandstands of 60,000, but they never filled them. Same way with in the infield, there was room for 100,000, but you know, they were probably more in the infield rather than the grandstand you see up there. So, as I said, there was a sanctioned AAA race, number 3314, and it's a 75-lap race. And so the gridding for the race itself, you practice, and there were practice times, but really the actual gridding was a draw from the hat. So Nuvolari made the fastest time, but he wound up in the third row by luck of the draw. Next year it was done by practice time. So it was a little bit more fair than what they had the first year. It cost per car to enter the race $125. And so they had darn near 40 cars entered in the first year. And chief steward for that year was A.C. Pillsbury. And the chief starter was Gar Wood, who was did motorboat stuff. The trophy, the George Vanderbilt Cup, was made by Carrier Incorporated of 5th Avenue, 52nd Street. They were jewelers. That particular trophy, I'll stop here and I'll go on, and so I won't forget to tell you. After the 37 race, there never was another George Vanderbilt, and it was stored who knows where, but it appeared some 10 years ago at Christie's. And Charlie, Bruce can correct me, I always say Charlie Schenfeld from Allentown bought this for $60,000, and when he went to ask where was it stored, nobody would tell him. Well, Charlie had it that fall at Hershey, and I remember George Hoffman and I going over in the old Whitefield. You don't go there anymore, across from where the rides are. And George says, "What is that down there?" I says, "Trust me, George, that's the George Vanderbilt Cup." And he says, "No, come on." So we went down. He says, "Yeah, it is." It was set in a glass case, and it was on a small pedestal. And there's two names on there: 1936 Tazio Nuvolari, 1937 Bernard Rosenmeyer. The trophy itself, the top part's out of round, because in 1936 Nuvolari sat it. Because they were given later at a banquet, the small keeper. And Rosenmeyer did the same thing in 37, so it's out of round. Well, anyways, I talked with Charlie about it, and the following year he had it there. And the following year after that, he didn't have it. And I said, "What'd you do with it?" And he says, "Oh," he says, "there's a guy on the West Coast that deals in exotic cars bought it from me." I said, "Really?" I says, "How'd you get for it?" He says, $100,000. I says, I thought you were going to keep that." "Oh, I broke right out in tears." I said to myself when we left, I says, 1,002, 3, bang. Well, anyways, this gentleman now has got it on exhibit in Italy, in one of the Italian auto racing museums. That's there on exhibit. So I figured I'd better tell you that before I went on and not forgot to say about where it is today. And we'll probably come back to the U.S. after its time of exhibit time. The engine sizes for both races were 6-liter limits, so it was not quite a Formula Libre race, but it allowed the Americans to run, and of course, eventually in 37 we had the thrill of a lifetime, if I could have been there, because I wasn't born, to get to see the auto unions and Mercedes run, and get to see the best of European talent. But you have to watch it in movies now. But anyways, the lap money, there was lap money like at Indy. Various industries or people would donate $100. And first place timed by, each of the leader, you got paid $100 for that. There was a total prize money of $60,000. And you got $20,000 for winning the race. The standing start was at 11 o'clock, which that is there. I keep looking at the screen because I'm getting ahead of what I think. But anyway, standing start, and it was waved off at 11 o'clock. Next slide. This is Billy Wynn, who actually led the first lap before Nuvolari got around and went by him. But they had a staggered start, and he got in there ahead. He didn't finish the race, but anyways, he got to lead one lap. And then Tazio took over and left them all in the Alfa Romeo to win the race. So there were his teammates were Antonio Bavaro and Giuseppe Fiorina, who was the first world's champion after the war for Alfa Romeo, after the war that is. So anyways, Nuvolari's average speed for the race was 69.92 miles an hour, which was quite slow compared to the next year. Of course, they did some modifications. Do another slide. Billy Wynn, as I mentioned, drove a Miller, 4-cylinder Miller. You also had, this is Jean-Pierre Vermeil in a Type 59 Bugatti that raced that year at the Vanderbilt Cup. You also had Wilbur Shaw in the Gilmore car. Next slide. And there's Wilbur Shaw in the Gilmore car. Eventually would be a 3-time Indy winner. And then eventually general manager after the war of the Indianapolis 500. And so, next slide. The tall figure we see standing next to the car after it stopped was a guy by the name of Joel Thorne. And Joel had more money than talent sometimes. I know at one time he was couldn't qualify or something, the story Charlie told me, so he was prepared to buy his way into the 500 one year, but that didn't work. But Joel built race cars, and when Caracciola came to Indy in 1946, since he couldn't bring the 1.5 liter cars, the Tripoli cars, he tested in one of Joel's big cars. And of course, was eventually practicing, qualifying one or the other. He got hit in the face with Berg and was injured. And but that was a Joel thing, or Joel. Yeah, I'm going too fast or I'm supposed to be saying, pushing too hard. Anyways, Joel Thorne. But anyways, Caracciola then recuperated the Holman farm in Terre Haute. And that's where they became great friends. And that's why the Caracciola trophies you see in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum are there, because his wife donated them long after Rudy died. But anyways, we need to get on with some of this here. So, next one. There's, to me, one of the greatest drivers in the world, Tassilo Nuvolari. And he was the actual race winner in 1936. He was good in alphas. He was very good in auto unions. I know in the 1935 German Grand Prix, he beat the full-force German Mercedes teams twice, and beat Van Brakic, who was leading at the time and blew a tire. But the real man won. I won't go into reading how I think of Van Brakic, but he wasn't one of my favorites. But the sad part is I've got every one of his pictures. It was drawn by Watts, autographed by accident. I happened to buy them. But anyways, the reason I say I'm making a big to-do over this, Herman Lang was a far better driver than he was. And he always used to say, and Herman Lang was a mechanic before he was a driver, he always said, beer for Lang, champagne for the rest of us. Well, Lang used to make him look like nothing. So I never met Lang, but I was a big fan of his. So anyways, some of the American drivers, I think I did, but I'll get the rest of my notes here, that were there present was Wild Bill Cummings and Carlton Miller, Murray Rose, Rex Mays, Ted Horn. He has a daughter, and I don't think she's retired yet from Dresser Rand. She never met her father because she was still in her mother's womb when he was killed. But you look at her and her since, Ted Horn. But anyways, you had also Bob Swanson. And so anyways, the green flag went, as I said, Billy Wynn led the first lap, then Nuvolari, and of course, finishing second was Jean-Pierre Vermeil in the Bugatti, and Bavaro in the other Alpha of the factory. As I say, Nuvolari's average speed, winning average speed, was 65.99 miles an hour. Well, next slide. This is still 1936, and this is Fiorina having a drink of water in the Alpha pits. And the other fellow that's standing there is one of the engineers from Alpha. I didn't know his name. Next slide. Again, another shot of Nuvolari's car in the pits prior to the race. Next. All right, now I'll stop. This is 19 37. So we're going to go on, hold that right there. They changed the circuit to make it faster, and I think we got it somewhere on this thing. There's a picture of the circuit, which was, they changed it, made it faster during the year. And so there's some changing and all the different things. The other thing that they did to this circuit, which now it was 3.3 miles in distance, the final turn had a banking of 67 degrees, or a little bit better, to bring the cars around and go down the main straightaway. If you look in the book that was written by Brock Yates and the photos from Smith, Hepstone, Oliver, you'll see Rosenmeyer going around the banking headed toward the grandstands on completing a lap. The race again was sanctioned by AAA, sanction number 3478. Chief steward that year was Beechcraft, David Beechcraft, and the starter was Alexander Stewart, according to what was in the program. That's right. The start, of course, this year was done a little bit different. The practice times then counted. So you had Carachol being up front. And so as we went on, no, don't do it yet. Then also, if you've seen pictures of the early days at Watkins Glen when it was a AAA race, that's 49 and 50, usually in the winner's circle you'll see this guy with sunglasses with a AAA armband. Well, his name was Lloyd Niemer, Rocky Niemer, and he was chief scorer for the two Vanderbilt Cup races in 36 and 37. So he's a familiar name at Watkins Glen. And he was, at that time, his own supervisor at the Glen at that time. Total prize money at that time, again, was $70,000. And let's see, and also we had lap money of $100. The entry fee again was $125. The fastest cars, there were 30 or so more out there. You were able to make the field. You went fast enough. So anyways, this picture up here we got is really neat. Starting from left to right, the little short guy with a necktie with no shorts is Ernest Von Dilius, Auto Union. Then Tazio Nuvolari, and then Bernard Rosenmeyer in the shorts. And you'll see him in Europe, he wears shorts off and on around when he hasn't got his coveralls on. But you know, Nuvolari and Rosenmeyer, even though they couldn't speak a common language, were very, very good friends, and they managed to speak somehow, sign language, whatever. But when young Rosenmeyer was born, Bernard's son, Nuvolari was the godfather. And I know I think it was the 1939 New Year's Eve, would be 38. They, Rosenmeyers and the Nuvolaris came together and had a New Year's dinner in Berlin, and but they were very, very good friends. And he often, Mrs. Rosenmeyer, wanted to get Nuvolari to drive auto unions, but finally, after Rosenmeyer was killed in the record run, then they persuaded Nuvolari to go and drive for auto union. Although in 1934, at the Spanish Grand Prix, Nuvolari and Caracciola did try, just try an A-type auto union. And then, of course, Nuvolari drove in the Swiss Grand Prix in 1937 an auto union, but he wasn't a regular member until 1938. And even after, when the war started, you know, he went to Tripoli in 40 and was there when he had a Maserati, to drive, and a cable arrived at Tripoli stating that Auto Union had renewed his contract for another 2 years. Now you got to remember, Italy hadn't got into the war yet, and the phony was just about was just starting. So he couldn't drive the Maserati. And even after, when the war was on, Nuvolari was getting a check from Auto Union. And, you know, had the war ended quicker or whatever, you know, and they would have came back and raced, he would have been their #1 driver. But, you know, Nuvolari got gypped out of about 6 years out of his career because of World War II. But he did drive after the war, but he wasn't. Probably one of the best races was the 1947 Media, which he almost won. Had they not had the magneto get wet, they had to dry it out. By that time, Biondetti got ahead of them in the 2.9-liter Alfa Romeo and won the race. Of course, Nuvolari raced in the next year in a Ferrari, and he beat that thing to death where it was coming apart, the fender came off, and all that. And eventually, he didn't complete the race because he was too sick. And the priest took him and put him in one of the churches there where the car stopped. But he was a sick man. Of course, he died in 1953. He always wanted to be killed in a race car like all that, but unfortunately, he died in bed, unfortunately. But he, to me, was one of the great drivers. Well, anyways, next slide. Great drivers. Well, anyways, next slide. Another tight shot of Nuvolari in the Alpha, 37. Next slide. This is Rex Mays, one of the Alphas. He was one of the very good American drivers. There's been a book written on him, and it's quite good. You know, and I have my library, but he was the one. He finished 3rd overall in this 1937 race. Next slide. That's another tight shot of Vandilius. Unfortunately, after the Vanderbilt Cup, the next race, when they got back in Europe, because Mercedes and Auto Union split forces, the Belgian Grand Prix was the same time as the Vanderbilt Cup. So they split the teams, and when they got back, then the German Grand Prix. And during the race, Vandilius and Dick Seaman came together, and Vandilius died in the crash, and Seaman got, I think, a broken nose out of it. But he was a very talented driver. They always had a happy smile. Next slide. This is another shot of some of the drivers there in 1937. Starting over with Nuvolari, then you've got Vandilius. The fellow right directly in back of Vandilius is the team manager, Reihofer. He was not as famous as Nuvolari, or not Nuvolari, get my thoughts right, Neubar. And so he got very little publicity. Next you've got Rosenmeyer when we get back there, then Rudy Caracciola, and then you've got Giuseppe Fiorina, and the tall gentleman here is Dick Seaman, who would win the German Grand Prix in 1938. Unfortunately, he was killed in the Belgian Grand Prix in 39. He married a fairly young girl who her father owned BMW, and her name was Erica Pond. And they were married about a year, and he was killed. And of course, you know, politics reared its ugly eye because a lot of the English didn't like the Nazis. Well, she wasn't really hot on the Nazis either. And her father said, if the war breaks out, get out of here. Well, she went to England and stayed for a while. And then she wound up, after the war, on the West Coast here. And she worked in the Five and Dime store. And Phil Hill and those people at Continental Motors knew she worked there. They didn't talk with her. She then eventually went back and married her second husband. They had a child, and they eventually moved to Florida. And the sad part of all of it is they all, not right away, died of cancer. Erica was the last one. Erica knew Smith, Hepstone, Oliver real well, and when Tom James was down to visit him, he was telling about different things, and he says to Tom, he says, Erica said, right, he used the English very strongly. I don't know, I'm not much on English, but he says, right there, that's where she sat. But she was up several times with hemp and all that, but unfortunately she died, but she was a very attractive girl. But anyways, that's a group of the drivers in 1937, mostly European drivers. The next one. This is an Auto Union C-Type, which is a V16 rear mount, twin stage supercharged. It produced 500, close to 600 horsepower. And this is what Rosenmeyer won the race with in 1937. Next slide. This gentleman here has been to the Glen. He used to come to watch George Weaver. And his name is Deacon Lutz. Drove big cars and all that, was at Indy. But the reason I got him in here, because he drove one of the RI Maseratis that raced here at Watkins Glen, 4501. But it was crashed in practice. But it raced the following year. But anyways, Deacon Lutz did drive one of the four RI Maseratis. Next. Here's Wilbur Shaw in one of the other RI Maseratis. He substituted for another gentleman that couldn't go very fast. Now, if you notice that patch on that gentleman's coveralls, does it look familiar to you? That's an ARCA patch, the Automobile Racing Club of America, which was the Collier brothers and George Rand road racing club. But that's getting ready for the race at the Vanderbilt Cup. Next one. There's another one of the RIs. All four of them were there. There were four built, 1 and 30, 2 and 35, 2 and 36. And they competed. Okay. Now you can see it, one of the most powerful road racing cars ever built. And that's the W125 Mercedes. Straight 8, twin stage supercharged, and it was produced 646 horsepower, the supercharger. And they were difficult to beat. Auto Union had their hands full, but Auto Union managed to win a few races, even though the 125 managed to win quite a few. Next one. The other thing I will say, leave it right there, is that, you know, to prep one of these cars, or this one, took you about a half an hour, because when the motor was cold, you had to go cook the oil, get it up to temperature, up about 70 or a little bit better. Then you started it, then you put different plugs in. If you didn't do that, you'd bend some parts in the engine, and then you'd really be unhappy. But it takes about 45 minutes. This is Rosenmeyer's Auto Union, and it's on the grid. So, no, take that back. That's been Billy's. Okay, next slide. There's Dick Seaman and the sister car to Lee Caratrolas and W125. The one fella in, I would say, civilian clothes, but not coveralls, is Rudolph Grunau, a brilliant engineer. He could speak English, because his mother was English, his father was German. But the neat thing about this gentleman was drivers would come in and say, oh, this car isn't doing well, this is not handling all that. He'd jump in it, and he was as good a driver as they were. He'd come in and say, yeah, there's something wrong with it, or you guys got to do better. Because even when, after the war, you know, when he built the 196, he could do that. That was a unique thing about Grunau. And Charlie Lytle had met Blumenau and along with Neubar several times. So, next slide. This lady here, when they had problems with timing, she had a set of, she's got one of them, she has a set of stopwatches. And she kept times on a lot of people. And when they got messed up on their times, they'd come see Alice Caracciola, or Alice Hoffman, Rudy's wife. And her nickname was Baby. And she was usually pretty on the money, okay? The gentleman in the straw hat is Ralph DePalma. He was the honorary starter to actually both years in 36 and 37. Next slide. There's Neubar talking to Uhlenhaut, and of course the driver in the car is Dick Seaman prior to the race. Okay. Now, for 1937, there's the picture of the George Vanderbilt Cup, the keeper and all that. These guys are, I believe, Pinkertons. But you note the sign over there. It says, starting single directed via Western Union from President Roosevelt in Hyde Park. And that's what they started the race with. He punched the button, although there was a flagman and the guy turned the thing. But that was the only time that was ever done. And Franklin Roosevelt did that. Next slide. In 1937, on the 3rd, the race was supposed to be held. First, the Europeans, of course, raced in the rain. And it rained, and the organizers said, no, we're going to postpone this, because this was Saturday. So they postponed it until Monday. Next slide. And there's the actual start of the 1937 George Vanderbilt Cup. Caracciola, Rosenmeyer, and Rex Mays in the front row. Next slide. Now, this is the banking down on the far end. Far end would be like when you're coming up to the grandstand. That's Rosenmeyer going around that banking. And it's speed. Next slide. Somewhere along the way, this slideshow isn't right, because we're getting there too fast. But anyways, other things that were to be on the screen were sheets of on different cars. What was done as far as practice times, and what they did, and where they finished. There was also an overall finish sheet for each year with the prize money, with the first place, second place, all the way down, and it noted the lap money and the accessory. There's Nuvolari and also Rosenmeyer got a Gruen wristwatch too. And but anyways, the first banquet in 36 was at the Astor Hotel in New York City. The second one was at the Waldorf Astoria, which Rosenmeyer got his keeper. Now if this works, I don't know. Now I'm bringing you back to Watkins Glen for a reason. See the lead car? That's 4504. That's George Weaver. That car ran at the George Vanderbilt Cup race in 1936 and 37. Of course, George led the first competitive lap at Watkins Glen. This car came back many, many times. Next slide. This is 4501. Notice the front grille is different. It got crashed in the Italian Grand Prix. This car here was built in 1935, and it was different. But all the others had the same grille like you see with George. This is at Smalley's garage, going through tech inspection in 1951. Go ahead. Now we're going to the Grand Prix Festival. This car, I'm not sure, raced it at Watkins or at Vanderbilt. Probably did. It was a Nuvolari car, and but I don't think it ever raced at Watkins other than vintage. And that's it in town. Next slide. That's at the track, and the next slide is me and the car owner. And I think that, see what happens next. Next slide. Is this where the movies are?
I think this is where the thing.
No? Okay, we're gonna back up, because there's the program for 1936. Anyways, that's all right. And it's probably about 40 pages, ads and all that. Next slide, let's see what we get out of this one. Okay, there's the entry list in the program. Okay, next slide. Rest of the entry list for 1936. Okay. These were releases, the different, when you came, the different teams and different drivers. This happens to be Alfa Romeo. No, this is the English one, which had Pat Fairfield and it had Goldie Gardner and Earl Howe and all that. But they had to sign the release, so the autograph hunters, we can make a copy of that. That's off microfilm. Go ahead. Now, there's the sheet I was telling you about that AAA did after you filled out your entry blank. The driver, or the car, the driver, and down in here there were other little details, specifications of the car. And you see also the time, some of the times that the best times are down farther for qualifying. And of course, then it goes on and says what happened to it and all that. And signed by Lee Oldfield, who was a AAA official. Next slide.
Walking on it.
There's Tazio Nuvolari's car with the specs and all that, and the times down there, and of course, they had Pirelli tires on there apparently, and the winner, and signed to that. These I got from a friend who went to the Smithsonian. This is off microfilm, both 36 and 37. They're interesting. Every car has one of these, and then, well, I won't say that till I get to it. Next slide. And of course, this is Fiorina's car, which is a Scuderia Ferrari Alfa Romeo, and its times and all of that. Why, what happened. Next slide. The one thing about these here, when I had them done on, for microfilm, white went to black, black went to white. We just crossed these over. They're not all that way. I've got to eventually cross them over to where they're, as you see them there. That's Philippe Atonso's car, French driver, drove Maserati, and his nickname was Fifi. The women would holler Fifi as he would go by. He was pretty talented French driver. Next slide. This is one of the R1s, I believe, and you see the times and all that. Ralph, I guess is how you would say that guy's name. And the times and all the stuff that where he qualified and where he finished. The garage number and the car number and all that. Next one. I got several of these, both in 36. Now, here's the actual grid for 1936, and with the speeds, times, and all that. And you see Nuvolari's down in the third row, and they were 3 by 3 by 3. All right, next. There's the other half of it, of the grid. Okay, next slide. This is the published one in the New York Times. I wanted to show you that because it's just a little bit different, you know, than the other one. It shows the same thing, really. Next one. Now, this is a series of 5 sheets. This is a pit stop record during the race. And it starts out, and you look there and you'll see the time it took them to do different things, what they did and all that. And the circle is actually the car number. The driver's name is above that, which shows all their pit stops. But it's a long sheet of paper like this, like a lap chart. Next slide. And you continue on with the different drivers and what they did, where they were, and all that. Next one. getting pretty, this is the third one, so this would be the end. Would be close to the end. The next one, if I'm going too fast, you want to read that, I'll stop and let you read it. Is that the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that should be on this slide. Okay, next slide. Somehow that's gotten messed up. Gold. That's the lead portion. There. That's the actual finishing with times, but not the money. Tells why they retired from the race. And you see these little notes I've got over there. It says 4503 and 4504. So those were the R1 Maseratis. But that was done on a hand crank mini. Today you get it on a computer and bang, it's there. This took a little while to type up and do. Next slide. Okay, there's the pay sheet. You see all the way up $20,000 for first place. Neil got $10,000 on down, all the way down. Total $60,000. Plus the lap money too, that is not figured in there. Okay. That's Nuvolari sitting in the car, well, shortly before he got into it. Sat. The gentleman that's close to the cup is George Vanderbilt. He was only 22 years old in the victory circle. Okay. This is at the hotel, at the Astor Hotel, and he's receiving Nuvolarias from George Vanderbilt, his keeper. And the big one in the background. Next. This is Nuvolari receiving that watch from Captain Eddie. And in the background there is different people, and Harry Hertz is the one directly back from Nuvolari. You see the height, Nuvolari, real short guy, when you look at put the different people that are inside it. Next. This is the cover for the 1937 Vanderbilt Cup. Nice cheap price. They're not cheap price to buy them now. 25 cents. All hand drawn. None of this computer stuff. Really nice. Okay. Now this is the revised 1937 one. You're looking directly really at the main grandstand as you look toward that drawing there. And on the far right of the screen, way over there is where that bank turn is at Roosevelt Field. Okay? Okay, this is out of the New York Times, and I drew in the 1937 track, and then the dotted ones is what it looked like in 1936 and what they changed on it. It's a quite good comparison. Next one. And this one here, you'll be looking straight down on. No, where is it? Should be one between that. No, backwards.
I'm working on it.
All right, try it again. Unless it got moved. It's another drawing. Now, forget it. This is the entry list for the 1937. And I've made some different notes and all that on the different cars. Next one. It shows the RI Maseratis over in the corner. Next one. There's the plan of the day, which didn't happen until Monday. It's on Saturday, but didn't happen on Monday. Okay? There's prize money, plus the contingency money listed below, and it shows the maker of the George Vanderbilt Cup, Carre, Fifth Avenue jeweler. Next. Credentials. These are all cardboard paper credentials that they use. Next one. And you can get a time sheet for speeds and a place to record it if you wanted to. There's a sticker for parking, for practice, another official, and of course the Champions Spark Club ad, okay? This is those same sheets for 1937, which Maury Rose drove one of the R1s. Next slide. This is on the back in the microfilm. This is pit stop, much more condensed than the long one. And you'll see what they did to the car and how long it took them to get in and out. And it gave you the pit number. So, next slide. Rosenmeyer's car. It was in garage 36 and car number 4. And next slide. There's his pit stop record. Okay. This here is New Willari's, which Tazio drove his car and eventually broke it. He took over Fiorina's and eventually broke it, so he didn't do as good as he did the previous year. Okay? And of course, on the back is this here in the microfilm, which is quite easier to trace pit stops than what they did in that long one. Okay. This is Deacon Lutz, the R1 4501. There's no back piece to this because it wasn't in the race. Okay. Vendelius's car. Garage 58. And so, next one. And the back, which will show you the time they came in and out, what was done and all that. Next one. That's Caracciola's. And tells you different things. And he was in garage 22, car number 12. Okay, and the back part, okay. This is Dick Siemens' car. And tells what they have and all that, basically the same as it has the previous year and this year. Next, and his pit stops. Next. This is one of the R1 Maseratis that Troop drove in the 37 race, okay? And his pit stops. Next. And Wilbur Shaw in the Maserati, the R1 Maserati, of the 4. Next. And his pit stop. Next. And the starting field, which they went by the fastest time this time. Next. There's Rosenmeyer with the trophy. And that doesn't have the base on the bottom, which they normally took it off apparently. There's a marble base that screws onto. Okay. Next one. There's the overall sheet and the pay sheet. And I wrote down here for my own reference what the R1 Maseratis did in the 37 race. And of course, that was done because I wanted to keep track of them and how they got to Watkins Glen. Because they were in Indianapolis too, even a couple of them after the war. Okay, next one. Well, we started in the middle or something, but anyways, that should be the end now. That's where we started. Okay, don't leave. We got a special thing for you. I hope.
Which year first, Bill?
36. These are a clip film of 1936 and 1937. One's an Italian, so. I don't think we've got the sound, which does not matter. The views of the cars. This gives you, this was a commentary where they showed the early Vanderbilt stage when you're right up to 36, 37. You'd have to eat your Wheaties to drive one of these cars. There's no power steering. Now you can see why Billy Whitman led the first lap. They had a straggle start. But the grandstands were in. I wasn't very full. This series of races were a little bit before their time, unfortunately. It wasn't until after the war that these things would have took off. See the planks, 10 miles of that planking, locust posts. Little Laurie. There he is in the winner's circle. Now we should go to 1937. And this is on the 5th, not the 3rd. This is after the rain day. A little more people, but, you know, there are more people out in the spectator area. Those guys are using the Indianapolis ingenuity there, setting on cars, some scaffolding. So they don't do it anymore as far as the scaffolding. This was a little bit faster circuit. They put a small oval in 1939. They ran some races, and then that was it. And there was a horse track after that. And what was left of it was bulldozed down in 2002. Shopping center now. What's left of Roosevelt? There's nothing left of Roosevelt Raceway. More Roosevelt Field where Lindbergh took off. There's Rosenmeyer. Now, George Vanderbilt wasn't in the winner's circle this year because he somehow didn't like the Nazis. That's what was written in the book. So he took off and went on safari. So they filled in. I think that's his mother. And that's all I have on the George Vanderbilt Cup races of 1936 and 37. And I hope you enjoyed our superly modified things. But we got it all in. So.
Bill, will you entertain any questions?
Yep. Yep. Go.
Bill, I had two questions. Did you ever find out where the cup was for all those years? Never did?
Charlie would never tell. They never told Charlie. When he told me, they would never tell him. Who knows? It was probably somewhere on Long Island or in some warehouse or storage, but it was in good condition. Charlie just put a little polish on it, and that was it.
Where is it now?
It is now on exhibit in Italy. He never told me who the fella that bought it, but it was an exotic car dealer in California when he sold it.
Didn't Card also give away a Vanderbilt Cup?
Who?
Card?
Yes, they did, yes. The next Vanderbilt, which I didn't mention, was in the parking lot of Roosevelt Horse Raceway in 1960. And it was called the Cornelius Vanderbilt, which was Formula Junior cars. It lasted there 1 year, and then it went to Bridgehampton for 3, and that was it. Now, where that trophy is, I don't know. But I do know where the Willie K is. It's in the Smithsonian Transportation. Yes.
And then 1960 race, and then the one that went to the bridge. What kind of cars did they race?
Juniors, formerly juniors.
Formerly juniors.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, now, Bill, the George Weaver car, who raced that at Vanderbilt Cup?
Well, the Wilbur Shaw had it.
That was Wilbur
37.
Shaw's.
Yeah. Yeah, it was owned by somebody else, but, and George Rand's car, 4503, was raced by Champ, I believe. Yes, your next question.
Just another question. You said that George Vanderbilt didn't like the Nazis, and we can understand why. That was 37.
That's right,
But
Wharton.
on the auto union, it clearly had a swastika. Were they being sponsored?
They were made for some reason when they came to this state, whether it was the German government or it was the organizing club, to put the swastikas on there. You know, later, just before the war, the drivers were made to wear the Nazi emblem, the swastika, but with the eagle, you know. You'll see some of them, pictures of them, but that was political there. Okay? Thank you so much. I hope I told you some good things.
Well, that was wonderful, Bill. So much I already said.
Primati dello sport italiano all'estero. Il circuito di Roosevelt Field, che queste scene iniziali vi mostrano come appariva nel passato, agli albori dell'automobilismo, ora completamente rinnovato, ha visto la sensazionale corsa di nuvolari su Alfa Romeo, che si è aggiudicato la prima Coppa Vanderbilt, alla velocità di 66 miglia orarie, mentre Brivio si classificava al terzo posto.
Motoring, the #1 road race was the Vanderbilt Cup. But road racing became too dangerous, and after being forgotten for many years, it was only last summer that the famous race was revived as a track event and won by Italy's Tazio Nuvolari. This year, Nuvolari is again competing against 29 other cars that smell like castor oil and sound like machine guns. The race is 90 laps of the Roosevelt Speedway, and for 75 of them, it's all Germany, with the usual battle between the Mercedes and auto unions. Rosemeyer is in an auto union, and the Mercedes team includes Caracciola and a young British driver, Richard Seaman. First, Caracciola takes the lead, then he drops out with mechanical trouble, and the race is between Seaman and Rosemeyer, with a crowd of 75,000 on its toes. Every time they see the Cup in front of the grandstands, the auto unions put on a spurt. And away on the far banking, Rosemeyer is grazing the top. And in the final stages, it's Rosemeyer in the lead with Seaman yards behind, and Rosemeyer wins with Seaman second. The cup is presented by George Vanderbilt's mother, and the only thing she forgets to do is to fill it with champagne. But with such